Today we're going to make these router rails. I made a really complicated version a few years ago, but I thought I'd make it a little bit more simple. As you can see, there's 5 boxes, so this should be much easier to do. So what are router rails? This will allow me to smooth and flatten surfaces like cutting boards or like maybe a log that I want to true up before I put in the planer. I've got a web page with step-by-step instructions which has material and tool list for this. Let's get started. All right, I went ahead and cut everything down. I had the entire material list on the web page, but this is everything. You'll notice I have arrows on my rails. The way that I did this, my stock that I bought was 11 inches, I think, altogether, and I cut these down into 3.5-inch widths, which matches all the other 3.5-inch pieces. Because the factory edges are so square, I went ahead and made sure that my outside edges, this will be the part that faces down. I went ahead and add arrows so I know where the factory cuts were made. This is a very simple project. I think this cost me less than $20. It might be a little bit more now, but $20 for everything you see here. I used 2 1x4 by 8 foot long pieces, as well as a 4 foot long by 1/2 inch OSB particle board. I used 1/2 inch, but I think you'd probably be better off with 3/4 of an inch. Having this open edge here means that I can glue onto it, which is why I bought this. This is the base plate. You could use plastic. This is a 1/4 inch thick. To make a really basic one, you really don't need anything more than this. The dowels are 1 inch in diameter. This is a really quick build compared to the last one that I made, but we'll go ahead and get started. What we're gonna do now is make boxes. So we've got the 2 on the end, 2 in the middle, and then the 1 in the center. Now, as you can see here, I've got all my boxes just roughly put together. We're going to use a technique to drill each one of these out really quickly, but these are the boxes that we're going to build. It's very simple. Now, to make each one of the boxes, we want to measure in on both sides 1 inch. So what I'll do is I'll take a piece of scrap the same width, and I'll measure in 1 inch one side and then 1 inch on the opposite side. And this needs to be obviously the same width as all the rest of the boards that we've got. So I'll come in here, I'm going to go ahead and mark these. And this is for each of the boxes. So I've got 1 piece here. I'll go on to the next. On each one of these blocks, we want to drill in 1/2 of a 3/4 inch piece, which is 3/8. We'll make sure that lines up. And then I'm going to come in here with an awl, and I'm going to mark 1 of these. I've got a trick that I'm going to show you that I've made a bite-sized video out of. It's going to be in the corner right up here right now if you want to click on it. But let's go to the drill press. All right, I've got my board here at the drill press, and I've got a board attached to the drill press with a couple clamps. I'm using a 9/64 bit because I'm going to be using a number 8 screw in each one of these. So what I want to do is I want to drill down just partially. And now I'll stop. I'm going to lock it in place right there. And then I'm going to bring my board, which has a little mark on it, right next to that line that I made. I want to make sure that that's going to be right on there. And now that it is, I'm going to clamp these down. Again, my board lines up right there in the center. Pull that out, and it looks like I'm where I want to be. I'll go ahead and drill this out. And now I'll move my board over so that the mark that I made earlier is up against that mark. I'll drill again. I'm going to repeat the process with all the rest of the boards. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and make the boxes with each one of these pieces. I want to make sure that they are flush on at least one side. So this bottom side here, I'm going to make sure that these 2 pieces are flush to the table. I'm going to use a longer drill bit so that I can go off the table here to drill into the holes. Obviously, you want to make sure that your drill bit is not wider than your screws. I'm going to take the block that we used earlier to make the marks, and I'm going to put it against the board. So I really want to make sure that all this is square. Okay, I've made my first box, and as you can see, it doesn't rock. It's nice and flush on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and make the other 5, and we'll come back. Of course, I'm on my very last box, and I found the best way to really do this, and that's to use a clamp. I'll tighten this up, make sure that I'm flush. Now we'll drill it out. We'll go ahead and put the side that has all 4 boards that are on the same plane on the table. So all of our boards are upright like this, and we're going to find the center of each end. So this would be the end piece here, and then all these are the end pieces. Find the center of each. So this is 4 inches, so I'm going to put a mark at 2 inches. On the large one, if you're following my thickness dimensions, it should be 4 1/4 inches. We'll grab our rails now, and we're going to place the arrow down, and then we'll flip it upright. We want to find the center, which mine is 4 feet, so I'm going to go to 24 inches, 2 inches from the other edge, and then we'll come 12 inches in for the middle pieces. We'll line our rails up, we'll drag a line across on all 5 marks. We'll go ahead and sand along the rails, and we're not going to do a whole lot. We're just kind of prepping the wood for the glue. Now, one thing you need to make sure that you do is sand the edge pieces that will attach to the rails. This will give you a far better glue up. All right, this is probably the most crucial step right here, and that is we're going to glue the center piece in here. You'll want to find the flattest surface that you can, and we're going to glue this together. Now, we'll add our plate temporarily as a spacer at this point. Again, all 4 boards that are on the same plane are down. I've got my arrows that I made earlier pointed down like this. Right now, we're just going to focus on the center piece here. We're going to glue it and then allow it to set. We'll give it a couple hours before we do anything else. Once you're sure that everything is set right, we'll give it some time to dry again and come back. Okay, now this is dried, so I'm going to go ahead and add my next piece and clamp it up as well. I'll line up each mark and then we'll clamp it down. I'm going to slide this down and I'll do the next part over here. Now I am putting this on a little bit thick so that the fibers will soak it up. Again, the most important part of this is to make sure that the rails are flat against the surface so that the plane along the entire surface here is the same. Again, if I look at this, we are still against the plate, and we'll give this a couple hours to dry and we'll come back. Okay, we still have the last 2 boxes to put on. But before we go any further, I want to show you a little problem that I ran into. Despite my best effort, I still have a problem with the wood extending beyond the rails here. Now, I could get mad and I could just throw this entire project away. Ultimately, what I'm going to need to do now is I'll take a ruler and go across here and then just keep sanding and being really careful not to touch the rails. But if you're watching this, there's a fix that I came up with to not have this problem. I suggest adding 4 toothpicks under each one of these, which will raise it above the surface so that you don't have this problem, because this is frustrating. So I'm going to go ahead and sand the boxes so that they're below the surface, and then we'll go on to the last ones. And now if I put a straight edge across here, then this box here looks like it's all below the rails. Now if I go to push this, I've got absolutely no play. So on my bench, I'm going to put some silicone pie mats down, as well as my toothpicks. I'll line these up with my marks again. And we'll give this some time to dry and we'll be done with this part. Now, as we wait for this to dry, I'm going to go ahead and make the handle pieces here. I'm going to find the center of one of these just by crossing the diagonals. I'll take my square and then I'm just going to do the same thing as before. I draw in a line for that center. And we'll go and we'll drill these out the same way that we drilled out the last ones. I am using inch dowel rods, so we will be drilling each of these holes out at 1 inch. So once again, I'll put this on here. I'm going to drill down just a little bit. Stop, lock it in place, and then I'll move my clamp bar here so that the line is lined up, and I'll clamp down. Go ahead and add some glue. Now we'll go ahead and let this sit and dry. On the 3.5-inch side, I went ahead and marked each one of my centers on each one of these handles, and then I found the center of each side. So I've got a mark right here. So I'm gonna line this up, and all along here, I'm gonna add my mark. Again, this is the top. Now I'll go through and I'm gonna drill out each side 3/8 in. I'm gonna be using a 3/32 inch bit because I'm using some number 6. These are 1.5 inch. I'm going to glue this, just add a little bit of glue on the top. And there we go. That's the entire frame. Very simple build. We'll go on to the next part, which is attaching the router base to the plate that will attach to the bottom of this. The first thing that we'll do is we'll find the center of our router plate. I'm just going to connect the diagonals. Now at this point, you want to make sure that the hole that you drill out here in your router plate is going to be a little bit larger than the planing bit that you'll use in your router. This is a 2-inch planing bit, so I'm going to go up to a 2 1/8 inch Forstner bit. If you don't have a Forstner bit that's large enough, you can always just cut it out by using a chisel. This is a 1/4 inch. It should be very easy to cut through. Okay, I've got my plate now, and what I want to do is I want to add some double-sided tape to my router base. I'm using outdoor double-sided tape, which is a little bit stickier than the other stuff. Now I'll take this and I'm going to put the smooth side against the router, and then I'm going to put this on here so that it's centered. And that should be good right there. Now I can flip this over and I can find my holes that I need to mark. Now, so this is easier for me to figure out where all the holes are later on, I'm just going to put a plus here and a plus there. That way I can figure out how this all goes back together. And I'll take the router off. I'm going to drill each one of these holes out with a bit that's a little bit bigger than the bolt that will fit in the router base. I've gone ahead and added my screws, just a couple at least for right now, and it fits in there really well, fits inside the tray. So I'm going to go ahead and detach it again and then glue the plate on. Before we glue, we want to make sure that we sand the edges just a little bit to prep the wood. Really important that we do this. Otherwise, the wood will not accept the glue. Besides that, we also want to make sure that we sand the part that's going to be glued to the bottom, which is this piece here. Now we'll come back when this is dry. One thing I forgot to do was to cut out the little notch here for my clamp so that I can lift this up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. You might have to do something like this with yours, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now this is pretty much done at this point. The one thing that we need to add to the bottom of this are some aluminum tracks. The reason for it, of course, is that this particle board, you know, if you're rubbing it against something else, in time it's just going to wear down. It's not going to be any good. And also to give it a little bit more stiffness, you can buy these aluminum brackets. I think I got them for $5 a piece, but they'll just go in the bottom corner here, and I'm going to use some epoxy and then some screws that will go through into the boxes here. When I clamp these on, I want to make sure that I'm really careful about how much pressure. I just want enough to push it up against the bottom of this. If we put too much pressure in one spot, there's a chance it could bubble out in another place. So we really want to make sure that it's just enough to keep it against our particle board here. Okay, I've got a baby bottle nipple here that I'm going to be using to put the epoxy on the track. I like these because it's really easy to mix. See if I just put some in here on the top of the nipple here, the other part in, and it's just really easy to get a good mixture on the top. I'll use a toothpick. It's really good at keeping things localized, so I'm not putting it on top of a mat and then transferring it from the mat to whatever surface. It kind of keeps it all together. I feel like I don't waste as much. If I'm doing detailed work, I'll come in here and just use the hole. But since I'm spreading this across a large surface, I'm just going to take it And I'll come like this. You might be asking why I'm doing this instead of just attaching it to the side with screws. I worry about sawdust getting between the bottom of this and the bottom of the base here. Now I've got my glue edge here, and it's going to go again against the bottom here. And I am going to add clamps. And so I just have enough that's just barely on there. You can see I can just barely twist it with my fingers, and it just tightens it just a little bit. And that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot more to this. You've got your router on rails, but what can you do with this? From this point, it's really difficult just to pick it up and start using it. You need to have some kind of rails that this will ride on. So I'm going to show you how to make some really quick disposable rails that you can get started with your project to start planing. Now, the problem that we run into is that any kind of wood that you're going to use has the ability to swell and shrink with the humidity in the air and the moisture. So we want to use something that's a little bit more stable than just plain wood. This melamine is very stable. I've been using it for a long time. It's not the strongest stuff, but it is very stable for what we're going to do. I've got this inch piece and this 5-inch piece, both of which are 3/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to attach this to the surface and duplicate this process for the other side. The great thing about this is it doesn't matter if you're at an angle, so we don't have to be absolutely perfect along here when we put this in, but we will want to do the screws from the bottom up. Going from the bottom down will cause us to have problems with the rails on the top. The cutting board that I'm going to cut is about 1.5 inches right now. I'm going to take off maybe 1/8 inch altogether. So the combined thickness of my 1.75 inches is 1 3/4 inches, which is perfect for this. You don't want to make this too tall, as the router bit will not be able to go down low enough to hit the surface of whatever you're planing. One really good thing about melamine is that a lot of times it's on sale. They use it in clearance. Sometimes it gets damaged. So you can get a piece of this pretty cheap, and it's just basically shelving. So one shelf that's about 12 inches wide by about 36 inches long will work perfect for this. And it might cost you maybe $4 or $5. It's not very much. So I'm going to remove my cutting board. I'm going to measure in 2 inches from the edge, and then 2 inches down here. I want to go across. So I'm just going to line this up and draw a line. Now I'll come in here and I'm going to drill out holes for the screws, and then this will just attach to the top like that. Real simple. The holes that I drill out need to be about the thickness of the threads. So I've got a drywall screw here, and if I put this on here, I have about 1/16 of a thread on either side of my 1/8 inch bit. So this is what I really want. The problem with this stuff is that it's really not good to screw into, but we're going to add a little bit of epoxy to make it a little bit stronger. So I'll start at the 1 inch mark, and then I'm going to go 6 inches in. So 1 + 6 is 7, 13, 19, 25, 31, and 37. I'm also using a 1 5/8 inch screw. You might want to go down to a 1 1/2 inch screw so that we obviously don't go through the top. Okay, I went ahead and extended my line on the top here, and I'll put the long width on this side over here. I'll use a second strip to hold it up. Okay, I've got my mark here. I'm just going to center it on the board. I've got my drill bit chucked in here so that it just goes down the length of the screw, which again is 1 5/8. Before I screw this in, I'm going to add some epoxy to it. I'll use a baby bottle nipple, and I'll just go ahead and squeeze a little bit of this in. Okay, I went ahead and clamped these down. You can see that I've got 4 clamps here. And I'll check to see if my board is flat. And as you can see, I'm a little off right here, so I'm going to use a shim. Now I think I should be okay with it not moving, but if I have any kind of problems on the front and the back, I can go ahead and add a board and then clamp it down. I lowered my router bit just enough that I can skim across the surface, and let's get started. A really important thing to remember here is that just like a router sled, you don't want to allow the router bit to sit in one spot for too long, otherwise you'll create a burn. This does a really good job, and what I like about it is I'm not focused on just going back and forth and moving it. I have full, complete range of motion. I can put it wherever I want. I can clean a little bit at a time. If I see that I've missed a spot, I can come back over it. I've cut this ash on the bandsaw, and I've got it pretty much squared up, but I need to really make sure that I've got one side that's perfect. I can't use this on my jointer because it's too wide. So I'll use my router on rails, and I'm going to plane this down just the one edge. I'll take a shim and make sure that I've got it anywhere where it sticks up a little bit. And that side's good, but I need to add another piece over here. And now I have no movement. So I can come back here and I can plane this off. Before we get started, I'm gonna go ahead and use some sidewalk chalk just so I know where I've been. So that that doesn't blow off, I'll use a little bit of water on the top. And here we go. And now I've got a nice surface that I know is flat and true. I can take this over to my planer and plane it down to whatever size I need to. That's it for this video. Let me know if this is something that you might build in the future. Let me know in the comments what you think.